So our first speaker tonight is Kate Mason. She is a community advocate who is concerned about the lack of government and corporate media transparency, in particular relating to public-private partnership transformations being rolled out in our towns and cities. She also has extensive work history in welfare and community development. Kate is committed to people having all the information available to make informed and considered decisions on anything which impacts their lives and the environment.
Okay, so Community Voice, as Matt said, is concerned about government and public-private partnership transparency and accountability, and that community members have the ability to influence policy which affects them. And we had our eye through this whole year, we had our eye on how transparent was the Department of Primary Industries, the DPI, who were the big players involved, and how was the community and environment being affected. So I want to go through our efforts combined with the other people who are also on this Zoom who are speaking. We all combined efforts at times regarding what we have found out and what remains unanswered. So we have questions about the government Varroa Fipronil poisoning measures. I just want to give a timeline of the events. So Okay, so the New South Wales in 24th of June 2022, the New South Wales government notified beekeepers that Varroa had been found in Newcastle. On the 27th of September 2022, the DPI was authorised by the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority, the APVMA, to use Fipronil to remove wild European honeybees. Research has shown that the Varroa mite cannot attack Australian native bees directly, as native bees have a different biology. The Australian Native Bee Association stated at the time, it's no longer on their website, at the time they stated the pesticide Fipronil is being used in a baiting program in the red zones. This pesticide is highly toxic to stingless bees and may remain active within these areas for up to 3 years. They stated feral European honeybees will collect toxic sugar syrup and take it back to their nests inside hollow trees. In due course, the nests will die, leaving substantial stores of honey, which will be contaminated with Fipronil inside the trees. The Fipronil may continue to remain toxic in these areas for up to 3 years. Unfortunately, native stingless bees and other nectar-feeding insects, reptiles, birds, and mammals may visit these nests and collect contaminated honey, and some of these will die from Fipronil poisoning. So on the 17th of August 2023, there was a total of 600 Fipronil bait stations deployed with a forecast of another 200. In July 2023, a strategic review report of the APVMA, who approved Fipronil off-label, which means it's not for its normal use, was commissioned at the request of the Federal Agricultural Minister in response to serious allegations raised during the Senate estimates. The findings are damning and focus on concerns related to the APVMA's approach to regulation, coupled with its engagement with specific stakeholders in certain instances, has a high risk of regulatory capture by industry. On the 22nd of October this year, in an ABC article, the DPI stated Varroa was here for 1 to 1.5 years prior to mid-June 2022. I haven't seen this said anywhere else, but we knew about this antidote, and we knew about this. People have been talking about this for a few months prior, but we couldn't find any written verification until it was in the ABC article. In October of this year, Murray Watt said that there will be another report commissioned on the APVMA structure and governance, and that will be provided to the Minister by the end of September 2023. We're waiting for this review. We haven't been able to see it as of this point. By the 1st of September 2023, according to the ABC, 40 million bees had been killed across New South Wales. And again, according to the ABC, in October, more than $101 million has been spent across the response. Okay, so just quickly, just pre-2022, before all this started, there was a report had come out that found that at least 11 species of bees met International Union for Conservation of Nature criteria to be listed as threatened, and that 3 species were already currently recognised by the federal government as critically endangered. And then there's just a report that came out in 2018 where 10 million bees had died, and the beekeepers had thought it was due to fipronil poisoning. One drop of this poison from one bee that takes it back to the hive will then kill the whole hive. Okay, so now this is the permit that was allowed. So this permit is still in force. This is the APVMA to allow supply and emergency use of an unregistered AgVet chemical for varroa mite. And you can see the rate that they can use it, the amounts they can use. And this is still in force. This is a new one that supplanted the previous one, and it's in force till the 30th of November 2025. If you look at and go to the APVMA website, you can see that fipronil was nominated in 2002 for review. And then in 2000, there was a notice of extension to also review the scope to include the environment. And that was in 2012, so environmental toxicity effects. And they released, the APVMA released an environment scoping report along with a fipronil report scope document. And in that scoping, so this is their scope, the scoping that they do, they say the environment, water, population and communities subsequently nominated fipronil as a priority chemical for environmental review. This followed the identification of new information, primarily from the European Food Safety Authority in 2006, showing that fipronil was highly toxic to organisms in the environment, particularly aquatic and terrestrial insects. These new studies also provided additional information on the toxicity of fipronil to fish and aquatic invertebrates, bees and non-target arthropods. And the basis for the current reconsideration is whether the APVMA is satisfied that continued use of fipronil will not be likely to have an unintended effect that is harmful to animals, plants, or things, or to the environment. So this is still in review. This was back in 2013, and 2002 was when the initial review occurred, and it's still being reviewed. There's nothing that's come out regarding findings as of yet. And at the same time, fipronil was allowed off-label to be used in the bush and on people's properties to kill bees. So this is what the APVMA was meant to look at that time: aquatic degradation, persistence in the environmental media, the soil, the water, sediment, and any other, effects on insects and animals. So this is just I'll just have this as part of the thing. I won't talk about this, but at that time, there was a lot of new information coming out regarding the persistence of fipronil in the environment that was not previously available, and that it might exceed persistent organic pollutants criteria. Okay, so just a quick rundown on fipronil. In 2013, the EU added fipronil to its banned pesticides list. It's a broad use insecticide and it's used to control ants, beetles, cockroaches, fleas, ticks, termites, etc. And it works by disrupting the normal function of the central nervous system. It's a controversial insecticide that was labelled a high acute risk to honeybees and was subsequently banned in 45 EU countries and restricted in the US, Canada, and UK to protect native insects and honeybees. So it's concerning that this was still allowed within Australia in 2023. And when the DPI discusses the fipronil baiting program and people's concerns about it, I have only heard them refer to that somebody stands there when the fipronil is put in and makes sure that no native bees come to the area. But I have never heard them address the concern of the honey that is then taken back into the nests or other things eating these dead bees, other animals. So this is just a bit more. In recent years, the toxic effects of fipronil and its environmental products on non-target species have resulted in major restrictions being placed on its use in China, US, Europe, and South America, and that there's a lack of data regarding the toxicity to amphibians, and also that it's highly toxic to certain birds. So this is what we came across originally. It's changed now on the Australian Native Bee Association, but this is what this is where we came to and at the end of 2022 and became quite concerned about the use of fipronil. So now what they say on here, this is taken yesterday, the DPI baiting program ended on 19th of September 2023. However, pesticide residues still in the environment from this baiting work may continue to impact local native bees and other pollinators in these areas for a long time. Unfortunately, it's difficult to know how much fipronil could still be in the environment in a particular red zone. Okay, so what we have also is we came across is that was a report from 2013, a government report where a scientific advisory group had been requested to develop a research proposal to determine the effectiveness of killing bee nests using fipronil, investigate the potential of this method as a useful management tool for Varroa, and determine the potential effects of this treatment method on non-target species. So they did the fipronil traps, and what they found was the usefulness of remote treatment as a method to manage Varroa in Australia is doubtful due to several reasons. And the one most relevant to what I'm talking about is there is a risk to non-target species from fipronil residue from the bees dying themselves and being eaten, and also in the nests. And that off-target species may come into contact with fipronil through robbing the nest of the wax honey pollen, or through eating dead and dying bees, and that this can affect green ants, sugar ants, wasps, flies, cockroaches, lizards, cane toads, and birds and mammals. Okay, so Community Voice Australia and Save the Bees Australia started a petition back in January to stop the poisoning of Australian native bees, and we asked for the immediate halting and removal of fipronil baiting in the New South Wales red zones, and a judicial inquiry into the relationship between government, industry-funded lobby groups and organisations representing chemical company interests. And why we asked for that chemical company interests will become apparent as I go along. And we got 35 at that time when it was lodged in Parliament, tabled in Parliament. We're up to like 37,000 signatures on that at this point in time. So this is an ABC article where they talked about our petition, and the Animal Justice Party, MLC Emma Hurst, tabled the petition in Parliament. I think that was back in August. She said the use of fipronil was causing huge community stress. The DPI has spent over a year trying to wipe out these mites in New South Wales, and the eradication zone just keeps expanding. History shows that complete eradication of these mites is virtually impossible, and it's difficult to see how this ongoing culling program by the DPI can continue to be justified with no end in sight. We wrote to the government, and we wrote to Plant Health back in April asking at what point, what are their measures and how are they going to assess when to turn from this emergency response to a plan of management. And basically from both of them, we basically got they think it's possible, so they're not moving into any sort of management, or an assessment of transition has not been undertaken. So there was, from what we saw and what we assumed from these letters, was that there was no plan B at that point in April, which is 9-10 months on from when it first started. And this is the same from Plant Health Australia. They think it's feasible, therefore they haven't conducted a transition to management assessment. Okay, so I just want to go through a bit of what people have been through, what very concerned community voice with the small end of town, with small farmers, small, just normal community members, and how they're being affected. So we've got Dolphy Benesh picture here in a newspaper article about him, the ABC, and Dolphy will be talking more later. But basically, Dolphy, he lost between $200,000 to $300,000 since they first started euthanizing or killing his bees. And he can just see the losses keep piling up. We have varroa mite response leads to crop losses, but also giant vegetables without enough bees for pollination. And we have a farmer here talking, he's not been able to grow as many zucchinis, his almond tree is bare. He said, why wasn't the pest detected sooner? And each time the mite is found, it triggers a surrounding eradication killing zone with a 10-kilometre radius. Even bees in hives without varroa are euthanized. He says, the effect on my mental health when they killed the bees was fairly devastating. It's like losing a grandson or something like that. The New South Wales Agricultural Minister, Tara Moriarty, who recently came into the role, says the eradication effort must continue. We can't give up. We've come this far and we just can't be in a situation we just allow it to spread. She says while she understands there's many different views on strategy, people with overseas beekeeping experience are strongly advising me to keep going. So not sure who that was overseas. Matt is desperate to get bees on his vegetable farm, and he said, as a result of the bee killing, his standard pumpkin crop of 10 tonnes to the acre is down by about 70%. Ms. Moriarty said the industry body AusVeg is the main avenue for farmers to receive support. Now, if we just quickly jump to AusVeg, we see that their leading strategic partners are Syngenta and Corteva, the two of the largest chemical corporations in the world. And that will become a bit relevant why I brought that up as I go along. Now, this is after they stopped the, they went to a plan of management, another article. So more than $101 million has been spent across the response. And unfortunately, this is the DPI Director General, Mr. Hansen. Unfortunately, as it turned out with Newcastle, we now know it arrived 12 to 18 months before it became obvious. These time lags really are an impediment to an effective eradication response. So my question and our question to the DPI, which hasn't been answered at this point in time, is when did they know? What date did they know that information on? And at that point, where it'd been in New South Wales for up to 1.5 years prior, how did they expect to be able to contain it at that point? And why didn't they go to a plan of management and make that really transparent to the public and everyone affected by these measures? Beekeepers were traumatized. This is the Evans family. It just destroyed us. It was terrible, James Evans said. And Mark Goodwin, a bee scientist who helped lead New Zealand through its varroa response, said that while eradication of the mite was not impossible in theory, the rapid spread of the mite indicates that it may now be too late. The scenario of eradication is complicated enough, but you also need to be very, very confident about where varroa is and isn't before you go down that track, he said. If this was New Zealand, we would not have gone to eradication unless we were absolutely confident that we knew everywhere varroa was, which isn't the case in New South Wales. Another article about people being decimated, their livelihoods being decimated and the distress it caused them. 2/3 of their business eradicated and not compensated fairly for the income that's lost. It's going to take a long time to be able to rebuild. And the transition to management is a little too late for many beekeeping families. She questioned the Department of Primary Industry's decision to pursue mite eradication. We feel that once the spread of the mite was found in the almonds orchards, that the DPI wouldn't have the resources to be able to maintain it. And that at that time they should have paused and reassessed the situation. And again, as many of these articles stress that people's mental health and distress has been really, really heightened because of the government's response. There would have been people that could have been looking at suiciding because of the toll it's been having on their families and their finances, their mental health. This is going to take a very long time to get over. Okay, so we just quickly go into the APVMA. So we'd have to have a lot of trust in the APVMA, this governing body, to allow Fipronil off-label to be put all through the environment. So it's important to focus on the APVMA. It's a cost-covered agency with funding received from levies, fees, and charges. And so you can see the income for 2022 to 2023 was $47 million. And out of that, $45 million came from industry fees and charges. And that's just levies charged on chemical products. Okay, so in, I think it was June or July, a report came out from the law firm Clayton Utz that was commissioned by Murray Watt, and the findings were concerningly, the review found serious allegations of chemical industry capture of the APVMA, which appears to have played a key role in the organisation not performing its full regulatory responsibilities. They found the authority which approves products like weed killer glyphosate was taking decades to review chemicals. Of the 10 ongoing chemical reviews, 8 have been in progress for over 15 years or more, with 7 ongoing for nearly 20 years. And as I said, Fipronil's been ongoing since 2002, so that's 21 years. And in that report, to just pull out, this is their quotes, the APVMA's approach to regulation appears to align with industry interests. There are instances where the APVMA's level of engagement with industry stakeholders should be carefully examined. Information reviewed includes instances where the APVMA's approach appears focused on assisting industry. A majority of the APVMA's ongoing chemical reviews have been in process for nearly 2 decades. And of note is that the APVMA is predominantly funded by the industry it's tasked to regulate. And in our view, this is a highly problematic model and fraught with potential for corporate capture over a government body. Okay, so Murray Watt also has now gone on to commission Mr. Matthews to conduct a rapid evaluation into the operations of the APVMA. Concerningly, the Clayton-Utz review found serious allegations of industry capture of the APVMA. And it was meant to get to Murray Watt on October the 27th to submit the report. Now, this is just quickly CropLife defending. And I'll go and talk a little bit more about CropLife, but CropLife defending the APVMA and pretty much calling for that it keeps independent and it doesn't have more government regulation or overview is how I read that article. This is CropLife. CropLife Australian members represent 85% of crop protection, which means the pesticides, insecticides, and 95% of crop biotech products used by Australian farmers. And you can see that it's the big chemical companies, and glyphosate, they're a big proponent of glyphosate. This is what they put into government in 2022 as to what they would like to see happen. They would like to strengthen the regulatory environment by removing barriers to innovation and growth. So less regulation, I would read that as. Improve access to crop protection, which is pesticides, for minor uses. Introduce national legislation for GM crops and remove any of the state-based moratoriums. Introduce voluntary labelling requirements for approved GM crops and fund communication campaigns to counter misinformation regarding ag biotech as well as chemical and biological crop protection products. It's a national peak industry organisation representing agricultural, chemical and plant biotech sector in Australia. And it's also a member of CropLife Asia and part of the CropLife International Federation of 91 CropLife national organisations globally. And we looking at CropLife, you go through and you can see governments works, very much with CropLife. So I will just whiz through this because I'm going to run out of time. But, here we can see Murray Watt going to addressing the CropLife Agricultural Industry Federal Budget Breakfast. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about just broaden this out a tiny bit and just to show how CropLife and these massive corporate chemical companies are working hand in hand with government. So this was about neonicotinoids. That was a great concern. And in April 2018, the European Union decided to ban all outdoor uses. And there was 232 scientists published an open letter to policymakers calling on other countries around the world to also restrict the use. And the APVMA, I'm assuming, is currently assessing that chemical as well. So here we have Plant Health, and they put on a talk and invited stakeholders come along. And at that talk, you have international representatives from Bayer and Syngenta attending and supplying information. And a question and answer session took place with representatives from the CSIRO, Bayer, Syngenta, APVMA and CropLife Australia. And in summary, the overall message conveyed at was that neonicotinoids are unlikely to presenting any greater threat to honeybees and crop pollination. So here we have massive chemical global corporations sitting with government talking about how these products are safe. Okay, so we look a little bit broader afield, and Australian food is growing with dangerous chemicals banned in other countries. It's got a global reputation as a source of clean food. In fact, the country has some of the most lax regulation of pesticide use in the Western world. There are more than 70 chemicals no longer in use in Europe because of their toxicity to humans, animals, and the environments, but are still in routine use in Australia. And the environmental groups such as the National Toxic Networks have called on the Albanese government to investigate Australia's agricultural chemical regulation. So again, they were also calling on that there's periodic reviews. I can't read my screen at the moment, something's on top of it, but 10 to 15 years in other countries where they're reviewed, which doesn't happen in Australia. This is the United Nations report to the United Nations, seeds central to people's food systems, cultures, and human rights. And they're talking about the big four agrochemical companies, which are Bayer, Corteva, BASF, and Syngenta, and that they have 60% of the global seed market and 75% of the pesticides market, leading to a stranglehold. We're just going on and just talking a little bit about these chemical companies that are involved with crop life. We've got Bayer, which has just recently settled thousands of US Roundup weed killer lawsuits as part of an $11 billion settlement with the lawyers who took cases to trial over allegations of the herbicide causing cancer. And they talk here, this was 5 or 6 years ago, Monsanto has specifically gone out of its way to bully and to fight independent researchers. That was shown through internal Monsanto emails, and that it showed how the agrochemical company rejected critical research and expert warnings over the years while pursuing and helping to write favourable analyses of their products. They fought science. And there's also a lawsuit in Melbourne at the moment with 800 Australians regarding Roundup who've been diagnosed with non-Hodgkin lymphoma. The Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations and CropLife have just created in 2020. They renewed and strengthened their commitment to work together and find new ways to transform agri-food systems. And here we have Via Campesina, which is looking out for small landholders, saying the Food and Agricultural Organisation must remain neutral and cannot be co-opted by private interests attempt to realise profits at the expenses of small-scale food producers, consumers, local communities and the environment. Now, we're lucky in Australia. We've got an organisation called Gene Ethics who's been looking at chemicals and genetically modified products since 1988, I think it is. And I'm about to finish, but I'm just finishing on a couple of last things. They have already put out what they want to the government, and they want base regulatory assessments of agri-chemicals and GM organisms on independent scientific evidence, not industry-generated data that's unpublished and not peer-reviewed. And they want this to all be much more transparent and open and precautionary. They want to reinstate the chemical assessment and re-registration scheme, which is where the chemicals are regularly reassessed. And they state CropLife Australia is the local branch of a global network of lobbyists which operate in 92 countries to promote genetically modified animals, plants and microbes and agri-chemicals. This is done on behalf of member companies which supply 85% of agrochemicals and 95% of crop biotech products sold to Australian farmers. Okay, so this is our last, close to last. We have a letter we sent off the petition to Murray Watt and also lately to Tara Moriarty, and then to Murray Watt. What we've really asked is we want a public review into the process whereby the APVMA granted the use of Fipronil off-label, what scientific studies they relied upon to take this action, what other bodies were involved in the decision-making, what risk assessments did they conduct, a thorough independent assessment regarding the subsequent cumulative impacts on the environment through the baiting stations, make available a service which the public can contact if they see any disturbing implications for wildlife near where a baiting station was placed, and how much Fipronil was used, how the DPI plans on decontaminating these areas. So we're still waiting to hear back from Murray Watt regarding those questions. I'm just going to finish on this for people that are interested in learning about more natural ways of dealing with Varroa. This is somebody that can be recommended, scientificbeekeeping.com. So that's just me in a nutshell. So looking at Fipronil turned into looking at bigger structures in place, which then turned to looking at a lot of the chemicals and what's going on and what's of concern. We want to, as Community Voice, keep working on this in a broad way because everything has an effect on the bees, but also looking at the use of chemicals on our environment. So if anyone is interested in working with this and helping us with a working group, if you can send, I think the email is in the chat, you can send an email over to Community Voice, or you could put your email down into the chat if you don't mind. That will be public, so it's up to you. But I will finish there.